With each subsequent development, the questions get louder. Is Donald Trump deliberately slowing down the Postal Service in order to help his chances in the election? His Postmaster General is a Republican mega donor who, 85 days from the election, by the way, decided the time was right for a chaotic and sweeping overhaul. On Friday, Postmaster General Louis DeJoy reshuffled the agency's executive structure, displacing people with decades of experience, moving some to new positions, others out of leadership roles entirely. That announcement also included a hiring freeze and a request for early retirement authority for non-union employees. Critics of the president say he's trying to sabotage the Postal Service ahead of the election. It was only a month and a half ago Trump identified mail-in voting as the biggest threat to a second term. All that sounding fishy enough for Democrats in both chambers of Congress that many of them are urging the USPS Inspector General to investigate. Joining our conversation, professor of journalism and politics at Morgan State University and a contributor for the GRIO, Jason Johnson, and associate editor for Real Clear Politics, A.B. Stoddard. Great to see both of you. So, look, A.B., here's the pushback on the idea that this is some sort of corruption. The post office is a mess. It's been a mess. It's been losing money, and it had to be fixed now. That's the argument on President Trump's side. What do you see happening here?
Well, first, Chris, I really want to thank you for spotlighting this story. I'm actually working on a piece about this, and I've been really stunned by the research I've been doing. And it's been a Washington story, and I think more Americans need to understand what's going on beyond those who are working at the post office and know across the country that there have been huge slowdowns in the delivery of mail. So as these, quote, reforms have been instituted at the post office, which slow down mail and therefore cause more loss in revenue, the new management is describing this as an effort to run it more like a business. It is not a business. It is a constitutionally enshrined government-provided service through which veterans and many Americans receive life-saving medications. We get our paychecks and Social Security checks and communicate with each other and on and on and on. More important than ever, of course, in a pandemic. These complaints have come from unions and postal workers around the country, and Congress, in its alarm, has asked the new management, Mr. DeJoy, to explain this. They said these slowdowns are temporary. They're going to produce these efficiencies eventually, and it's going to be no problem. The problem is President Trump is doing a two-step. One, you institute a new management at the post office with reforms that slow everything down. In one apartment complex in Minneapolis, hundreds of people got their mail stopped for many, many days so that they couldn't vote in the primary, didn't receive their ballots. And at the same time, go to Twitter and the microphones every other day and say the post office is a mess and the election won't be fair and it won't be free and everything will be riddled with fraud, so that it really is slowed down by the time election day comes and people start to lose faith in the post office, and then he can say that the election was a mess.
Yeah, and as you know, Jason, that the concern by a lot of Democrats is that is just one aspect of it. Let me read to you something from the New York Times. Imagine not just another Florida, but a dozen Floridas. Not just one set of lawsuits, but a vast array of them. And instead of two restrained candidates staying out of sight and leaving the fight to surrogates, a sitting president of the United States unleashing all-caps Twitter blasts from the Oval Office while seeking ways to use the power of his office to intervene. The possibility of an ugly November and perhaps even December and January has emerged more starkly in recent days as President Trump complains that the election will be rigged, and Democrats accuse him of trying to make that a self-fulfilling prophecy. So do you see a situation where, among other things, we have a problem with the post office? We have these ballots that don't get where they need to go in time, whether it's get to the people who want to fill them out or get where they need to go to get counted. We move into such a post-election day timeline that it just reinforces what President Trump has been saying since almost the day he was elected, that the re-election will be rigged.
Well, Chris, I got to point out, and I read the same article, that was very interesting. We have to work on the terminology here. This isn't chaos. Chaos is Jurassic Park, random things that occur. This is intentional. This is a plan. This is throwing a monkey wrench into functional machinery. If you think about it, under most circumstances, there's actually an increase in hiring in the post office as you head into the fall because they assume people are sending packages around Christmas time. The president is intentionally destroying an entire government agency, just like he gutted out national security, just like he's tried to gut out the FBI, because it may end up being the vehicle through which he ends up losing power. That is what's happening here. There is no question. The fact that even Marco Rubio has put forward policy now saying, hey, look, maybe we got to extend the deadline for count so we can figure out when the electors are coming in. Even Republicans realize that this massive method of voter suppression that the president is engaging in doesn't guarantee their victory. So we have to be clear about what this is. This is intentional. The problems with the post office have been going on for 20 years because they have this weird structure about how they have to pay off retirement, which is different than most other government agencies. That could be fixed with the flick of a pen and the Office of Management and Budget. This is Donald Trump's plan, and Democrats and Republicans who care about democracy have to stop him. It has financial and democratic consequences that we can't even fathom at this point.
But how do we do that? And I'm thinking about what Fred Hyatt wrote. He's the head of the editorial board, of course, in the Times. He said, between now and January, Trump may not have time to rewrite the rules for Twitter, create his version of Russia Today, or withdraw troops from every allied nation that annoys him. But he is learning what he can do. He has cowed dissenters in Congress, swept aside aides of stature or independence, purged and demoralized career officials, and installed judges who will be less inclined to stop him. If he wins a second term, do not expect his incompetence to save us. But if you go to the heart of that, which is if what you're saying is true, Jason, what's going to get done about it?
Well, there's a couple things that the Democrats can actually do. You can engage, you can get an inspector general to go in, and if there's a problem, they could actually put a hold on some of these reforms, or at least suggest replacements or fixes for some of these reforms before we get into the fall. The other issue is going to be this, and this is going to be really key. You have a fight that's not just going to be at the governor's level, but it's going to be at the state level. Who is the Secretary of State? Who is responsible for counting votes in districts? Because if you have a local Secretary of State, let's look at Arizona, for example, Republican governor, but the person in charge of elections in Maricopa County, which is the biggest county, is a Democrat. If that person is saying, hey, look, keep delivering the mail, keep counting it, regardless of what Trump does from Washington, D.C., it won't change the fact that counts are still going. So the Democrats' plan has to be, one, send an inspector general, see how many of these reforms you can stop. Two, put as much money into these new COVID and care and sort of investments in the community to make sure that you can rehire and replace some of these post office people. And three, make sure you've got 1 million lawyers on the ground everywhere in every substantive county to make sure that you're starting court cases now, because we don't even know how quickly some of these court cases may actually go through the system. But if the count is going in Joe Biden's favor, which I suspect it will in most of the places Trump's attacking, it may not end up mattering.
Yeah, I'm curious what you're hearing from Democrats you talk to, AD, because one of the things that I hear from a lot of Democrats that I speak with is that they actually think this is going to be a motivating factor, one of many, for Democrats to get out and vote early, vote by mail, and that their best protection may be such a wide margin state by state that any kind of challenge to it becomes a joke. But what are you hearing?
Right. So the nightmare for Democrats is that the Republicans vote largely on Election Day, showing a good night for Donald Trump, where he might not win, but it looks close enough in the key electoral college battlegrounds that he just tells everyone on Twitter, I've won, and the Democrats are going to try to steal it through these fraudulent ballots that are going to come in the weeks to come. You'll hear all about it, and it's totally fake and it's rigged. And then, you have ballots counted in Maricopa County for Joe Biden, but days later, and you get counts in some swing states later than that, and he continues to denigrate those results, in the days that follow November 3rd, and that's really a nightmare for Democrats. I think at that point, he's going to put pressure on Republican legislatures in battlegrounds, even where there's a Democratic governor and or Democratic Secretary of State, to choose a slate of electors for him or throw it to the House of Representatives. It's a long, scary nightmare. I'm not going to play out all the details, but it is important the Democrats, like you said, Chris, educate their voters now. Don't wait till there's another hot spot in your region in the fall. Find out the balloting process. and get it in the mail as soon as possible so that voters know what the stakes are.
Everyone's staying with me because after the break, we've got more to talk about with you folks. Two candidates, two completely different messaging strategies. The campaigns are now framing their final arguments, and it might